Welcome everybody to our webinar on tradition and inclusion in martial arts. My name is Aisling Clardy. I work at the UNESCO Chair in Inclusive Physical Education, Sport, Recreation and Fitness. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you here today with our full panelist of expert speakers from all around the world. We have speakers from across the time zones. We have speakers in the US, in Europe, the UK, and in Japan. So it's morning, afternoon, and night. And I wish to offer my sincere gratitude to all of you, especially our two Japanese panelists. It's 10 p.m. at night for you. And we're very, very grateful that you're joining us and taking this time of day or night to be with us. I also wish to welcome all of our attendees, our guests, whether you're listening live, if you're here with us, or the recording on YouTube or on UNESCO ICM's learning platform. This is the third webinar in a series that the UNESCO Chair is facilitating in partnership with UNESCO's International Center of Martial Arts for Youth Development and Engagement in South Korea. And this one is going to be especially juicy. So as many people know, martial arts is founded on tradition, and it's a key component to martial arts. And so this webinar specifically discusses tradition and inclusion, how tradition can be a facilitator of inclusion, and also how it can also challenge. So there's a whole spectrum of how that can contribute to inclusion. And we'll talk about the full spectrum. We'll have some examples of how it's being used in Japan within the physical education curriculum to facilitate the values that are associated with martial arts and to keep that tradition alive. So as I said, we have panelists, we have experts, academics, we have practitioners. We have a really full panel. So our session today is a little bit longer than some of the others. It's an hour and a half. And I can guarantee that the time will absolutely fly because we have such a rich conversation lined up for you. So throughout the session, what I'll do, I will introduce each of our panelists and they'll speak a little bit more about themselves. And then we'll address and discuss three specific topics. So the first is we'll look at the history of martial arts in the context of tradition. Then we'll look at the socio-cultural value of martial arts with the example of Budo becoming part of the physical education curriculum in Japan. And then the third topic, we will look at how to overcome some of the challenges, coming back to really harnessing and bringing the whole conversation back together, looking at the challenges and the facilitators and how we can, as coaches, or how you as coaches can contribute. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So first of all, Dr. Sotaro Honda from the Fukuoka University of Education, Japan. I really hope I pronounced that well. So would you explain to us and provide a little background about yourself and your expertise?
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Sotaro Honda. I work at University of Teacher Education, Fukuoka in Japan. I have been doing Kendo for more than 40 years. I have Kendo 7th Dan, and I also have Naginata 1st Dan. I was a British Kendo national coach between 2002 and 2007 after I finished my PhD course in University of Gloucestershire. I have taught Kendo in many countries, for example, UK, China, Hong Kong, Italy, Russia, Singapore, Spain, and more. My research interests are Budo education and physical education, teacher education. I'm also an author of this book titled Kendo Approaches for All Levels. In this book, chapter 8, I wrote about right attitude in Kendo sparring. How to practice with different types of people. For example, practice with senior levels, practice with junior levels, practice with someone of the same level, practice with someone of senior age, how a male practitioner practices with a female practitioner, how a female practitioner practices with male practitioner. And I have seen and I have had practice with a couple of times with people who have only one arm. I have seen a person who doesn't have legs and competing in World Kendo Championships. I also have seen people in wheelchair trying Kendo, but I haven't taught Kendo to them. I don't have any experience. So by attending this webinar, I'm hoping I can learn something about this kind of inclusion. So I'm looking forward to. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And you know, I really like what you said there. You're hoping you're going to learn something, because I think we're all going to learn something. So really, thank you for mentioning that. Dr. George Jennings from Cardiff Metropolitan University in Wales, who's also on UNESCO ICM's advisory committee. So we welcome you. Please share.
Thanks, Aisling. I apologize if you hear any soaring in the back. My neighbour just decided, just at the very moment you're introducing me, to decide to do some gardening. So I might move to the lounge later. But I'm George Jennings, and I'm really pleased to be here. I've done martial arts for over 20 years. I started when I was a teenager. Mainly my background's in Wing Chun. I started with Taekwondo, and I started specialising in sport science, sport and exercise sciences, mainly inspired by the exploits of Bruce Lee when I was a teenager. And then I got into my studies and a PhD looking at Chinese martial arts as transformative practices. And now since then I went to Mexico. I looked at the reinvented, or should we say invented, traditions of Shilam and some other martial arts. And now I'm back in the UK, and I'm looking at Tai Chi Chuan, and historical European martial arts and how they're taught and learned. And that's also involved in looking at research online, because a lot of the time during the pandemic, they were teaching online through different, for example, Zoom classes. And so I studied a bit of that as well. At the moment, I'm also interested in humor. So how humor is used in martial arts pedagogies, which can also be inclusive and exclusive. So it's really nice to be here. And I think overall, the message is really, I'm interested in how martial arts can be reinvented or reconstructed for different purposes. So hopefully I can be of use today. Thank you.
You'll absolutely be of use. Absolutely. I can guarantee that already. Thank you very much. Dr. Yoshinori Okade from the Nippon Sports Science University in Japan. Welcome.
Hey, nice to meet you. My name is Yoshinori Okade at Nippon Science University in Tokyo, in Japan. And I myself haven't any special Budo experience, sorry. I have learned a little bit Shorinji Kempo, at the university. And then also I have accepted one student from France. His major is Budo, the karate. It's very interesting for me. His doctor thesis comparison between the karate practice in Japan and France. Through the discussion with him, I have learned a lot of how different the practice between two countries are quite different. And also, since I have working at Nippon Sports Science University, I have so many Budo educator at our university. They have a very rich experience in teaching and several different martial arts. It is very interesting for me. Therefore, I'm so keen to enhance my knowledge in this field, in this seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And once again, also to say once again, sincere gratitude to both Dr. Okade and Dr. Honda staying up so late. It's quite late in Japan, and just to acknowledge that we're sincerely grateful that you're sacrificing your nighttime with us. Thank you. And Nick Hoekstra. Nick is from the University of Kansas in USA, and he also has a lot of experience practicing various different martial arts himself. Welcome, Nick.
Hello, thank you. I'm very excited to be here with such a diverse and interesting group of fellow panelists. So as Aisling said, my name is Nick Hoekstra. Professionally, I work in inclusive education. I've worked in the area of international development on education-based projects all around the world, from Southeast Asia to Africa to Latin America. And I'm currently doing my PhD in special education here at the University of Kansas. But On the personal side, I started training martial arts when I was, well, I was a wrestler when I was in high school. And after I graduated from high school, I trained Aikido and practiced Aikido for many years. I have a black belt in Aikido, but in 2008, I moved to Japan where I started practicing Judo. And I also attended the Kokusai Budo Daigaku, which is a Budo university, so a martial arts focused university in Katsura, Japan. I was a Bekasei, or a scholarship student, and I obtained my black belt in Judo in 2011. And shortly thereafter, I started studying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I've practiced martial arts in 5 or 6 countries as I've traveled and through my work when my work has taken me to different countries. So this topic specifically today, the whole webinar series is, for me personally, extremely important and extremely relevant, because this combines both my professional side, which is inclusive education, and my personal side, which has always been the martial arts. So I really am so happy to be here and look forward to the conversation today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Nick. And to add, also that you're doing all of this as a person who's fully blind as well. So you have also that insight.
Forgot to mention that point. Yes, I'm also blind since I was 7 years old. Yes.
Well, and I think it's quite fitting too, because obviously you being fully blind has not had any limitation, or obviously there's been challenges associated with that, which we've spoken on some of the other webinars and maybe even today as well. But it definitely hasn't held you back. Thank you, Nick. And so Lynn Jehu from the University of South Wales, welcome.
Welcome. Hello, everyone. I'll try and keep this as brief as possible because I can ramble on. I've been involved in martial arts, predominantly karate, for about 40 years now. It became a lifetime passion for me quite early on in my studies. Eventually led to me moving to Japan, where I spent 5 years in the company of Mr. Hoekstra, who we've just met. At that time, I predominantly studied a variety of different karate styles, but I was also lucky to study some Ryuko Kobudo, or Okinawan weaponry, and some Niten Ichiru Kenjutsu in the city where I lived, which was Kitakyushu City. In my day job, I'm very much involved in sports development and trying to use inclusive practices in that way within certain target groups in the UK to get more people involved in sport. I think today that perhaps you will see a different perspective from me. I'll try and look at things from a perspective of someone who's involved in coach education, as well as someone who's an experienced martial artist. If that's a good approach I'm going to use, I think, okay? And perhaps what you'll see is what's often considered traditional in contemporary martial arts, I may give a slightly contradictory opinion, because I do feel that sometimes tradition can be a misunderstood and misused concept. So I'm completely aware that perhaps some of my views, etc., might be challenging to others, and I accept that, and I hope we can definitely have an interesting discussion and debate. And again, I'm really looking forward to learning from such an expert panel here today, including so many of my close personal friends. So thank you, and I hope we can have a great chat today.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Absolutely. And I think, definitely, as you're saying there, you'll definitely bring some richness, and even a bit of contradictory insight is good. It can really enrich conversation. And so last but definitely not least, we have Simon Dodd, a Shotokan karate coach who also works at the Cardiff Metropolitan University in Wales. Welcome, Simon.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. Having just listened to what Lynn said, I have a feeling we're going to come at this from a similar approach, actually, which is going to be interesting. So my background, very much like George said, I was inspired by Bruce Lee films when I was a very young child, sort of 5-6 years watching them with my uncle. I had no idea what the difference with any of them was. I just knew I wanted to do something like that. And I think I spent 2 years or so trying. I think I went through 7 different martial arts trying them out until I found that at the age of 8, Shotokan karate just really clicked with me. And 24 years later, I'm still doing it. And it's just become it's been a way of getting into, generating a massive passion for learning about Japanese culture, and is something that has continued now. You mentioned obviously that my work at Cardiff Metropolitan University. I've been really pleased to do some publications with George and Dr. David Brown primarily, and a couple from myself as well, on martial art topics. But I'm not an academic as such. I'm actually work in IT. It's something that is purely a passion. And I'm a club instructor in a all volunteer and non-profit karate organization in South Wales.
Thank you very much, Simon, for your lovely introduction. And we definitely, I'm very excited about getting the conversation going. And you know what, as some of you were sharing, you know, I hear a lot of Bruce Lee, and it just reminds me, so Dr. Okade, I don't know if you recall when we were having a preparatory conversation, you had asked, you know, one of the, you were musing, why is it that Westerners are so interested in martial arts? And I think we might have the answer already, Bruce Lee. And I'm sure that it's the traditions and the discipline and all, but I think Bruce Lee definitely played an important role. So let us get going into the first topic. So we have the first topic is history of martial arts in the context of tradition. So Dr. Jennings, you're going to take the floor and present a little bit, and we'll follow up with some conversation. Whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thanks, Aisling. Now it's quiet next door, so that's good. Hopefully it stays that way. So so tradition, we might think as a concept, exists, say, in the English language and many other languages derived from Latin. I think one of my colleagues recently, we were writing about this topic, and he came up, it comes around the 11th or 12th century, started to come into popular use. So it's an old term, but we might think of the tradition as something that's comes across different generations, it's passed down, and generally involves a practice, maybe involving materials. So in martial arts, I'll come to in a bit, we might also have recently invented traditions, for example, belts, that may involve bowing or tying or sitting in a certain position, okay? Maybe in a ritualistic manner, which may be seen as then as a tradition. So traditions might involve language, physical movement, and possibly materials, all combined normally. So often traditions can be lost or changed and modified and replaced with something else. So some sociologists and social theorists think about the idea of disembedding, something being removed, and then something being re-embedded, being put back in place. And this may be because of institutions changing, for example, the church modifying its practices, rituals, or maybe science emerging as a major institution in society. And others look at tradition as a way of, in many ways, parallel to the idea of modernity. So modernity is a period of time, generally agree, or a process in many ways, from around the 15th century, end of the Renaissance period, when the European empire started to spread across to the Atlantic. Globalization increased and was accelerated, obviously with a lot of the dark side of slavery and other things, other darker side of globalization, mobilities, and it allowed social mobility as well. So a lot of things that we used to have in the medieval period in Europe, say, or feudal period elsewhere, would be the social classes quite distinct. Here we have more fluctuation and change. So some people even talk about post-modernity, which is another concept of much more individualistic, fluid identities as well. So there's lots of different concepts we might draw on in the conversation. I won't go into too much detail now. So for example, in Europe, at the moment I'm looking at historical European martial arts, which is known as HEMA, an acronym of HEMA. Basically this is historical fencing. So you might look at it in history, fencing would have been the preserve of the upper class male elite. Okay, so women were not really permitted to learn fencing. There are some drawings of women doing some movements, but having an advantage of a man in a pit. I think they could hit him with a club if he was doing something wrong. There's some interesting research about that. But generally, the fight books, which are the manuscripts that we still have today, show generally one man versus another man, and also a right-handed man, because then there was discrimination against left-handed people. So the tradition then was to be right-handed, to be heterosexual, to be Christian, to be white, to be upper class, so basically all the hierarchy of society at the time. They would be practicing what we might use the word martial arts, even though the word martial art might not have been used then in whatever language it might be, Italian or French at the time. Okay. So, but now in the modern times, some of these practices have been reconstructed. So HEMA is in many ways a movement rather than martial arts, for the revival of lost embodied knowledge. And this lost embodied knowledge could be fighting with a dagger, fighting with a long sword, with a sword and buckler, which is a small shield, Viking combats with a big shield wall, like you might see in this TV series, which is great fun. And those things are brilliant. And then left-handers like me, I'm left-handed, can be on the left side of the shield wall and practice, and obviously have a big role to play in the group. So lots of groups that have been possibly because of what we might call tradition have been excluded. Now that martial arts have been reconstructed or reimagined for different purposes, we see a lot more inclusivity involved. So as women, for example, in the group I'm studying, there's a female co-instructor who's left-handed as well. So she helps us a lot, helps the beginners in different seminars and things like that. So before, obviously hundreds of years ago, she wouldn't be able to do that. Okay. And then, so I talked about the reconstruction. The other one I mentioned earlier was the invention of tradition. So a lot of the things we call traditional now aren't actually as old as we believe. So in wider society, for example, this might include kilts. So many of you might think of Scotland. You might think the first image that flashes to mind is a bearded man with a bagpipe and a kilt, okay, which rises above the knee. But that is the modern kilt, which actually stems from the Industrial Revolution. Actually, I think it was developed in a mill in Lancashire, so actually it was developed in England. But the traditional kilt would have been from shoulder down to below the knee, the one-piece kind of suit, per se. So the modern kilt is an invention. So if you go to a city like Edinburgh, which is in the south of Scotland, they are not in the Highlands. They do not speak Gaelic, but the Highland dress would be associated with the Western Isles and the mountains of Scotland. Different people, really, many ways, a different ethnic group. But the invention of tradition in the 18th, so should we say the 19th and 20th centuries, were when nationalism started to spread, many ways towards the end of the European empires. And that's why we started to have these ideas of, this is an ancient tradition, these are our people. Another example is Christmas. We always think of turkey, roast in Britain, for example, turkey, potatoes. And we think, well, the turkey comes from the Americas, as do potatoes. But they were only really started to be popularized through the idea of Christmas cards and Christmas trees during the Victorian era, particularly thanks to Charles Dickens's book, A Christmas Carol, which has been, as we know, reinvented and reconstructed many for the Muppets to cartoons and everything. I'm sure we all had that in our childhood and at the moments. So yeah, so these things now we think are traditional are probably around 100 years old, 150, maybe Edwardian, or even younger. So for example, in Wales, we have the national flag and the anthem. The anthem, Land of My Fathers, was again a Victorian church song, a local song that was reconstructed over time to be a national song, sung from what translated into English from the Welsh language. And then the flag of the dragon passant, the one horizontally, red dragon, very famous. But again, this is a reconstruction over time. There were lots of different versions of this flag up to the 1950s where it started to be standardized. So yeah, so we can see that practices vary, and then eventually they start to have a common agreement. And this is what we call the invention of tradition. And in martial arts, as I mentioned, belts. Yes, of course, belts have all existed in cultures across the world, but the idea of a coloured belt, the hierarchy, again, is quite a recently invented tradition around the 20th century, starting with judo, as you probably know, also influenced by Western ideas of education, public schools, etc., which actually incorporated, Simon's done before we talked about this, the fireman's lift. Some of their techniques actually incorporate some Western ideas as well. So we might have the bowing and the sitting, and then in Taekwondo and other martial arts, also recently constructed in the 1950s and 60s, borrow this idea of the belts. And then other martial arts, like for example, the Mexican martial arts I mentioned, like Shilam, which was developed in the late 1980s, early 1990s, also has a colored belt scheme. And a lot of Chinese martial arts follow this now, but they did not have that previously. So the Japanese, it's quite nice we have a panelists have specialized in Japanese martial arts, because I think that Japan has really contributed to this invention of these new traditions. And it has helped martial arts being recognized, and it helped us understand the structure of martial arts in that way. Yeah, so I think, yeah, and traditions used a lot in the Chinese martial arts as well. And a lot of things you might consider Chinese martial arts, they may use belts, a lot of them don't, but they would normally be structured around postures and forms. So these formulaic sequences, known as kata in Japanese. But a lot of those kata would have been modified and changed again in the early 20th century, or even up to the mid 20th century. For example, my main martial art, Wing Chun, the most popular lineage is of Ip Man, who was Bruce Lee's teacher, one of the reasons I got into Wing Chun. And that's, again, a quite modern approach to Wing Chun. It's the most popular one around the world, again, thanks to the name and the reputation, and it's openly taught. And it's been modified, and things have been disembedded and re-embedded in that way. Maybe some Chinese philosophy and ideas of, for example, the 5 elements have been stripped away. Another thing, and now people are trying to reconstruct it and trying to find what's been left out, as we know from other styles. I know Lynn's very interested in the origins and links to Chinese martial arts, Southern Chinese martial arts, and Okinawan karate, for example. So yeah, essentially, and then there's an interest in, as you mentioned, Aisling, the why Westerners like us are interested in martial arts. I think a lot of it stems to kind of a very soft version of Orientalism, in the sense that we're fascinated by other cultures. And I believe, yeah, martial arts can give you a gateway to different cultures through, we discussed in a pre-webinar meeting about language, for example. You might be inspired by reading, you might read Tao Te Ching, the Lao Tzu and Lao Tzu, the classic Chinese philosopher. You might read about the history of a country. And I know some of my colleagues, say Simon and Lynn, have been fascinated. That's why you obviously journeyed all the way to Japan, or you feel like symbolically connected to Japan in that way. And researchers found that even also in Brazilian martial arts like capoeira. A lot of people feel, they start to learn Brazilian Portuguese. They plan to travel to the homeland and save up, all those kind of things. So and then traditions also often used in contrast to the sporting elements of martial arts. A lot of people want to preserve martial arts because they feel there may be a damage done by the sportification or sportization process, turning a martial art into a sport. And how could that be irreversible? For example, karate now in the Olympics, a lot of I know practitioners are fearful of what it could do to the reputation of the art. That's another thing to consider, again, possibly in our discussion. So I hope this has been a brief but helpful one. And then just the final point is, I typically use the word traditionalist. In my PhD, I had the title Traditionalist Chinese Martial Arts, because all of them had an idea towards tradition. They had certain practices and certain things they wanted to preserve or conserve. But again, at the same time, a lot of them were progressive in the sense of their views. And a lot of people in Wing Chun now talk about progressive approaches and changing it for each generation. You should build on the art of each generation goes along. But they still don't want it to become a sport, and they don't want to be too watered down, so to speak. So traditionalist is often used, and I know some researchers now are avoiding this. They talk about legitimacy. So back to capoeira and those kind of things, they talk about maybe not so much authenticity, but a lot of practitioners will use the word authentic. So my Tai Chi teacher and his lineage will talk about an authentic lineage. So this is the idea that the knowledge is passed down from generational teacher to student across the generations. And then we can clearly mark out your family tree of the martial arts. So which kind of family or branch do you come from? That's often linked to how you're an authentic teacher and you have legitimacy as a practitioner. So yeah, so essentially I hope that's useful in the sense that we talk about, I'm sure, lots of things, gradings and bowing and rituals and the etiquette and manners of martial arts. Some of them may be modified, and I know a lot of people will be talking about that. And I know Lynn wants to chip in about talking about the relation to tradition and football. Don't know if you want to step in now, Lynn. That helps.
Thanks, George. It's kind of almost a joke that's grown out of a real issue, really, over the last few years. I think it was George and myself and another group of guys together at a conference a few years ago, and everybody was talking about traditional martial arts, a term I really don't like to use, but we're going to use it today, aren't we? Right? And they were talking about different martial arts and so on. And I think one gentleman was talking about Shotokan karate, okay? And the ancient traditions of this art. And I asked that person, when was Gichin Funakoshi born? The father of modern karate. And I think he answered correctly, 1868 or thereabouts. Great. Then I said, okay, now I'm a football coach and I'm a football academic, soccer. Do we regard football as being an ancient tradition? We don't, do we? I hope anyone disagrees with me. I don't think we do. But the first organized professional club in the UK was formed in 1858, 10 years before Funakoshi was born. But football is not regarded as an ancient tradition because it's not. And I say this as almost a joke, but I think it's a really good example of this soft Orientalism that George has mentioned, which I agree 100%. I don't wish to take over this conversation because I quite easily could. So I'll stop there, but I think that there's nothing wrong with tradition if we're going to use that view. I think it's how we use it. And if we're going to talk about inclusivity, I think we really have to bear in mind that if we want our practice to be inclusive, then we shouldn't have tradition as a yoke around our neck or to be tied by it, okay? So I'll finish there because I'm very aware I can get carried away. And George is nodding because he knows too. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. I don't know if this is a good point now to open. Is that what you wanted, Aisling, to converse among us?
Yeah, absolutely. I welcome conversation. You know, I'm loving the conversation already. I'm learning so much already, and I do think, you know, what you just mentioned there, Lynn, of, you know, when traditions and what's coming to my mind, you know, in terms of, because I always have my inclusive hat on, always thinking about inclusion. And when I think of tradition, I understand the value and the importance, and I understand why people want to hold on to the tradition from my perspective. And, you know, as a kind of an outsider in the field of martial arts looking in, I see people, the tradition aspect as people wanting to hold on about what's sacred about it, if sacred's the right word, or the, you know, the socio-cultural value, that aspect. But like, as Lynn was saying, if some people may be holding on to the traditional aspects, especially maybe even in the West, I don't know, more, and those could be the aspects that aren't as traditional, but it might create a lot of resistance then when it comes to inclusive practice, if people are like, no, this is the tradition. So yeah, that's my insight. But Simon, I see you had your hand up there, so please join in.
It very much comes straight onto the back of what Lynn said. The very first question I wrote when I was getting ready for this is, why and how do Western instructors use the term traditional as a selling point? And the thing I want to emphasize is that I am purely coming from this as a Western practitioner, and I think possibly the only person who's not been to Japan out of the group here. So in some respects, that doesn't make it a bad opinion. It actually gives the view that we get that's normal for us. And I jotted down a couple of short examples. So the first one I put down was that, and sorry if you see me looking away, I've got a second screen, which is where I put my notes. One of the first things I put was that there's a sense of, particularly when, you know, speaking to people who started karate in the UK when it was new, there was this fantastic sense of mysticism. It was something completely new. Everyone's wearing this white uniform. What is this? Why have they all got belts? And there was a sense there that captured people's imaginations, because it was something so different to what was already in existence. You know, I mean, boxing obviously had existed for a long time, but all of a sudden we've got something else that it's very easy to look at something that comes from outside your culture as instantly being better than something you do yourself. And because of it, it very much becomes a marketing tool and almost like a unique selling point for a lot of people. And so I'm sort of fast forwarding it to today, where it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, because people who don't fit into let's say our UK's traditional sports and activities often find they go into something that's other instead. And actually, this is where the inclusion comes in. Something that is labeled as traditional from outside our own culture becomes a way of people who struggle getting into other activities. And that's sort of the case with me. I was always very sporty, but very individual sport. And I didn't like doing team sports in school and PE and stuff like this. But I was happy. When I was struggling in PE in school, I was competing internationally for karate. And they had no idea. I was playing badminton in the RAF men's team, you know, at the age of 13 or 14, you know, and they didn't know this. The only problem is the slight negative side of it is where you do get some instructors, and I've experienced it myself to this day, and they stick on the label of tradition as an excuse to not evolve and move on. And I've seen them teach practices, exercises, warm-ups that have been proven to be physically bad for you, but the response is, well, we've always done it. And that's where I feel there is a slight problem. And to give a very short example, one of my students, when he went off to university, he immediately looked for another karate club to join while he was there. And he was a good practitioner. I mean, he was first dan when he left us, you know, sort of pretty much onto his second dan really. And I've always had people talk to each other, help each other, discuss, learn, etc. in the club. And he went into this one, and the instructor used the traditional element as a way, I hate to say it, but of becoming a bit of an egocentric practice. So he would go to the side, he would meditate for 15 minutes, no one was allowed to talk to him. Class would start, no one was allowed to talk. I do, you follow, and that was it. And he told me the practice in there and the standards were dreadful. And that's probably a result of refusing to accept that maybe they could have improved and didn't. And so that now becomes the focus. So I'm just going to finish it with something I wrote, which is the way that I describe our practice. And I do use the word traditional, or traditionalist, but I use it very quietly and mostly just to myself. And I put down that when I use the word traditional, is referring to the values, intentions, and purposes behind our practice. So it has that original purpose that our style was formed for, but with 21st century practice and development as well. And so it's that evolution that becomes important. as well. So yeah, that was my little addition, if I may.
Thank you, Simon. And before we move on to the next conversation, I'm wondering, would either of our Japanese panelists, Dr. Honda or Dr. Okade, do you have anything to add to the conversation on tradition?
I think the word tradition often attracts people. Like you said, martial art is for many people something new, something you are not familiar with, and you get interested. And then you start with something new. And as you progress, as you keep going, you find something meaningful in your life. I have been doing Kendo for 40 years, but for first 25, 30 years, I just did what my teacher said. Then I didn't quite learn much about tradition. I just always wanted to win all Japan championships. I didn't do dirty tricks. I always try to fight fair and square, but my priority is winning competition. Then after 30 years, I started realizing this is something meaningful in my life. And the people around me are very, very important people. And they support me, they help me, they change me to a better person. And then following my senior and teachers, I realized I wanted to be like them. And then I started getting into the entrance of tradition. It takes a long time. Like I said, it was something new to me, and then gradually something meaningful in my life. Thank you.
Beautiful. A lovely contribution.
Yeah, thank you very much. That is also very interesting. Right? Tradition is but always recreated. Yeah, that is not fixed. If someone would like to add some new the values or the meaning to some sport or the martial arts and so on, then people say the tradition. This is old tradition. This is maybe not the positive meaning. Yeah, it's an old tradition, but valued. Therefore, we have to change. In this sense, we also use the word tradition. Therefore, yeah, maybe the meaning of tradition has a different. And the people use this word to achieve something. Yeah, to get the agreement among the many people and so on. Therefore, we always think about the background of using the word tradition. Why they would like to use the word tradition, and so on. This is my opinion. Well, after hearing your discussion, so.
Thank you, Dr. Okade. Well, and how about we stay with you and move on to the next topic. So the topic that's looking, I think it's a very natural, the conversation is naturally flowing this way anyway. So let's talk about and hear your presentation about the socio-cultural value of martial arts.
Okay, my name is Yoshinori Okade at Nippon Science University, as I have already mentioned. I have forgotten to introduce myself. My research field is curriculum development of physical education in Japan and also in some different countries like Myanmar, Cambodia, and in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And then I'm so pleased to have this opportunity. And then, okay, sorry. This slide shows the outline of my presentation today. Okay, I will go. The name of Budo as content area in physical education in junior high school in Japan is quite new. In 1989, Budo is firstly introduced as the contents alias name in the course of study after the World War II instead of Kakugi. The Budo is currently internationally accepted as the Japanese traditional physical culture in the world. At this moment, Budo is defined as in this slide. Okay. And in 1989, our ministry has decided to use Budo because of its popularity and international acceptance as Japanese traditional physical culture. In the revised Basic Education Act in 2006, Budo is recognized as one of the effective means to understand Japanese tradition and culture in the internationalized world. The three features are shown are the characteristics way of thinking of Budo. These three. And before practice of game, the student should express their respect to peer in using specific manner or lei. Because peer is camaraderie to achieve the same goal, not the enemy. In the revised course of study in 2017, 9 martial arts are shown to be taught. So, in relation with assessment, ministry suggests some condition to teach martial arts in physical education, like this. These are the quite basic requirements, but it would be difficult to fill all of them, especially having appropriate instructor for teaching Budo would be difficult. So ministry has asked educational board to check the ability of physical education teacher because of safety to teach the Budo in physical education, giving opportunity to develop teaching ability to teach Budo among physical education teachers and or to ask some people outside of school, such as police, are shown as alternative to teach Budo in physical education. But police don't have enough experience in teaching Budo in physical education in junior high school. So sharing information such as lesson plan and unit plan between physical education teacher and the police is recommended. Okay, sorry. Okay, this one. The co-education in teaching in Budo is also another problem because before 1989, Budo was not taught for girls in physical education. Only boys can be taught Budo. Also, the little is known what and how Budo is taught in special needs schools. Even though we can see in this picture, the tradition, as I have mentioned, is one of the discourse created and institutionalized by someone. Budo as compulsory content in the first and second grade in junior high school means that every student have to learn Budo. So if students have negative experience in Budo in physical education, it would influence on the value of Budo in society. Therefore, Japan Sports Agency, the several Budo Federation, and the researchers in Budo are now offering several physical education teacher education program for teaching Budo in school. Also, sharing experience in teaching Budo in physical education among stakeholders should be expected. It makes possible to create new tradition in teaching Budo, not only in physical education, but also out of school. Thank you very much for your kind attention. This is my introduction to the Professor Dr. Honda. Yeah. Then I'll stop.
You're muted, Dr. Honda.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to talk about Kendo within the Japanese physical education curriculum. First of all, I'd like to explain what Kendo is. Kendo is practiced by means of attacking and defending 3 target areas to strike: men, the head; kote, forearms; do, trunk; and 1 target area to thrust, tsuki, the throat, between 2 opponents wearing a set of armor and using bamboo sword called the shinai. There are about 2.7 million people who have Kendo downgrade in the world, and 70% of that are Japanese practitioners. So about 1.7 million people who have Kendo downgrade in Japan. And there are many different types of competitions held in Japan. For example, All Japan Kendo Championships for under 12, junior high school, university championships, and All Japan Company Workers Championships, police championships, and teachers championships, and women's and All Japan championships for people who are over 60 years old. Kendo has an inclusive aspect. Kendo is often called 3-generation culture. As shown in this picture, people at different ages gather together and practice together. And people say it's never too late to start Kendo. Everyone can enjoy practicing with everyone. And there are important teachings to help each other and develop together. Everyone is a teacher and everyone is a learner. When you fight against someone, reflect your attack after successfully striking and thank your opponent after being struck. I want to pass these ideas to people, and I'd like to make Kendo more inclusive, like in this picture. People from different ages and different physical abilities, different nationalities, different regions can share enjoyment of Kendo and develop their friendship. Now I'm going to talk about Kendo in physical education. The object of physical education consists of knowledge and skills, thinking, decision-making, and expressing, and also attitudes. These are pretty much same in all activity areas. For example, ball games, swimming, dance, and of course, Budo. But here, students are expected to understand traditional way of thinking. More specifically, in case of Kendo, it's not just a competitive sport. Kendo, as a form of Budo, aims to train the mind and the body and to cultivate one's character through developmental skills. Control one's emotion by considering other feelings. By understanding these, students are also expected to show their respect to their opponent and strive to uphold the ways of traditional conducts. So obviously, not like this after winning or losing. You need to keep calm and quietly bow to each other before and after practice in sitting position called the seiza. You bow to teachers, bow to each other. The question is, and the challenge is, how? According to an investigation, questionnaire survey, average number of Kendo classes for year 1, junior high school year 1, 8 classes. For year 2, 8 classes. For year 3, 9 classes. It's not like Kendo practice in local clubs where they practice 3 times a week, every week, for months, for years. And Kendo class or other Budo class, it's not like moral education in classroom. Kendo as a physical education, you need to prepare, you need to plans, and you need to have aims that you want to teach, you want your students to achieve. And activity have to be fun, otherwise students get bored. And it has to be safe. And you have to ensure students actively engage in activities. So you need to keep balance of these 4 aspects. For example, if you stick to too much on fundamental moves like footwork, how to use sword, and if you spend too much time, students wouldn't enjoy competing against each other. But if you too much emphasis on competitive aspect, it could be dangerous without developing enough skills. So it's how much you spend on closed skills, how much you spend on open skills in 8 or 9 classes. It's quite difficult. So to achieve the aim of Kendo in physical education, what needs to be included? What can be excluded? That's something many teachers are worried and concerned. Not only Budo, but also in other activities. Teachers start something easy to understand and also something easy to do, and encourage students to take step and by step and another step. So skills, traditional way of thinking, traditional conducts, inclusive aspect, that's same. Something easy to understand, something easy to do, and aims, fun, and pleasure. Safety, amount of exercise, keeping good balance. We encourage students take step and step. That's all. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Honda, Dr. Okade. Fascinating presentation, very, very interesting. And it sounds to me like, you know, what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that when adopting the Budo, the Kendo into the physical education curriculum, how it was taught had to be adapted by the teachers. Is that right? You're muted, Dr. Okade. Be going.
Who's the Honda fast? For us, when we have decided to introduce Budo in junior high school, there are so strong criticism. Yeah, majorly there are 2 reasons. Huh? One is the history of the World War II. What is happened in the World War II? Yeah, the people has used martial art or the Budo as the skills to kill the person. It's our history. Therefore, the people are so strongly criticized to introduce the Budo. to teach in schools. After the World War II, the occupational army has forbidden to use the word budo. Instead of budo, we have used kakugi. Yeah, that is the reason why we have to change the name. And another thing is the safety. Yeah, in the junior high school, especially in judo, there are so many injuries in physical, not only in physical education, majorly in the extracurricular activities. There are so many the big injured among the students. Therefore, for novice teacher, it is very difficult to protect the injury among the student. Therefore, the Japanese government has strongly recommended to ask someone outside of the school. But on the other hand, as I have mentioned, the people outside school have a little experience to teaching junior high school students, especially all of them are novice. Little experience, and the motivation are quite different. And usually the maximum 40 students in a class is very hard to control. Therefore, the Japanese government has tried to develop the document like the teacher's guide for teaching martial arts, for example, for Kendo or Judo and so on. Whereas I have mentioned there are 9 the martial arts recognized as the Budo is very hard to control. Therefore, usually the Budo is a major of the martial arts in junior high school. Then comes Kendo, and then comes quite little, the small. And then only few people know what the Ju-Kendo is. When we have had this name, when we have discussed in the committee for developing the curriculum for the junior high school, there is only little people, but because it has recognized as one of the martial arts, therefore such martial arts is introduced to as a content of physical education. Yeah, therefore we always a little bit how can I say, we have to always consider which content of martial arts we should take in physical education, in which condition and so on. Otherwise maybe there are so many students who don't like the martial arts. No? But on the other hand, if we can develop the teaching content or the teaching method or the pedagogy in school context, maybe we can give a good example to the martial arts outside of the school. This is maybe quite interesting the relationship between the martial arts in schools and outside of school. This is my impression at this moment.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a momentous task, really embedding martial arts or embedding this into the physical education. And as you were sharing that, I know some research by Dr. Dean Dudley from Australia. He's done some research actually in the field of physical education, and they find as much, while enjoyment is important as well, what's also really important is that the students feel competent, that they feel like they're being successful in whatever it is that they're doing, because it's more likely to translate into lifelong participation if they feel successful. So setting the children up for success, and that's a whole other topic of how to do that. But, and I know probably all of you could jump in here, but actually, Nick, I'm really hearing what the presentation we've just heard, and even just what Dr. Okade shared, I'm hearing a lot that, you know, your background in the special education, especially the universal design for learning principles, could be very valuable here in this context. So I'm wondering, is this a natural segue into the next part of the conversation, even in response to what was just shared?
Sure, definitely. I can do a bit of a summary kind of everything we've heard up to this point, and then use that as a launching off topic. And I guess for the last bit, we can all have a more general discussion, if that sounds good.
Sounds great.
Great. So I think there's the points that I want to highlight here is what we've talked about is the word tradition and or culture, however whatever word we want to use. Traditions, they're flexible, they change, they can be great gateways into the practice of sports or martial arts. However, traditions can be both inclusive or exclusive. And what in our daily practice as practitioners and as coaches or instructors, sensei, whatever the terms that we choose to use, what we have to be careful with is to not hide behind the word tradition in any way that it becomes an exclusive terminology. So what I mean to say by this is some traditions that I've seen in my own practice and in my travels, you know, we have things like lining up and sitting in seiza. That's great. However, we have to be considerate of the fact that some people are not able to sit in seiza, sit with their knees folded under them, especially older people or people with different types of disabilities. So in that sense, a traditional, what we might in the West consider a traditional practice of sitting in a particular way can be very exclusive. That's an example of where we have to stop and say, is this really necessary for the art that we're practicing? Other examples, when many gyms, many dojos, many clubs, we recognize rank. We recognize students who have spent more time in the club, have a higher belt ranking, for example, or have a higher designation, whatever the art might be. And that's great. Recognizing achievements and recognizing time, recognizing experience is fantastic. Again, though, what we have to be aware of is we can't use that then to exclude how we practice with one another. There is something that Dr. Honda said, which I think is incredibly important. It's super crucial for everything that I believe in, and it's that every individual is a teacher. So when we as practitioners or as coaches find somebody who has a different level of training or has a different physical limitation, those are opportunities for us to learn, and we can benefit by working with different body types, with different ages, with different people, because that helps us further deepen our own understanding of our sport or of our martial art. So again, we always want to be aware that traditions or aspects of a martial art that we might consider traditional or kind of natural to the martial art can be great, but we have to learn how far we can take those before they become exclusive. And that's where we have to stop, you know? But the other aspect that I want to talk about is how tradition can also promote inclusion, because tradition, as many of the panelists have already discussed, and for me as well, that aspect of practicing a martial art that was viewed as something more traditional, more ancient, or from another culture. There are many different aspects that it can be looked at, and those can get people really engaged, and we can use that to really encourage people to continue training. So for example, I'm thinking back to teaching judo to children. When you're teaching judo to children, one of the practices that we've often used in the clubs where I've worked is teaching them the Japanese words that are used for the techniques. Now, there are a couple of reasons for that. One reason is just because the Japanese words for throws, such as osotogari, ouchigari, those words are used in commonly to name the techniques. We don't typically use the English translations. So we teach kids those words because it's the way that we typically refer to them, but also you start to teach them a little bit of vocab, and it gets kids interested, and it becomes something cool that that students are taking away from a martial arts training that is something more than just a physical activity. It's also something mental. It's also something cultural. And that's something that can be really engaging to students. Or, for example, teaching students, why do we move in a particular way? You know, like, what was the historical importance of a particular movement? You know, why in Kendo do we use this armor? What is this armor's basis from? You know, where does this come from? Those sort of aspects of teaching tradition can be really engaging to students. And that can keep students coming back to a martial art. It can keep people interested in a martial art. But also, let's look at belts. So belts are a more recent kind of traditional adaptation in the martial arts, but it also serves a really great purpose because it gives us something to work for. It helps us build our kind of consistency. And many people, you know, having a goal to reach, you know, having that next promotion, that next belt, those are things that can also really help people keep engaged. And this can, as much of people with disabilities as people without disabilities. So finally, one other point that I want to mention, and again, this is a delicate line for where we draw between tradition becoming exclusive and inclusive, is, you know, some of the formal ways of lining up in classes, those can be really well used to promote students to learn things like awareness of their environment around them, also to help young people who are very energetic, or perhaps people that have trouble concentrating. Having those structures to a large extent can be great, because building structure into a class can really help students with, you know, different types of disabilities, whether it be attention hyperactivity disorder or students with autism. Having structure is fantastic. It really helps people know what to expect, and having a particular place where they know that they need to be in a line, for example, can be super helpful. But we just have to make sure that that we don't take that and carry that to an extent where then we're starting to exclude people who maybe can't line up for a particular reason, whether it be physical or et cetera. So again, the word tradition that we use can be both inclusive or exclusive. And in our daily practice, we just have to make sure that we're using tradition to promote more people to get engaged with our martial arts, to keep coming back to practice, because that's what we really want to do. Martial arts are great for people's, you know, physical fitness. It's great for building communities. And that's what we really need to make sure, that when we use tradition, when we use culture, that's what we're promoting. Now, a couple of other things that Dr. Honda said that I just want to touch upon is, so as I mentioned at the beginning, how we can learn from everyone. That's fantastic. That is something crucial. One of the other things, though, that I think is important to keep in mind with our practices is the culture that we create within our clubs or within our dojos regarding martial arts that have a competitive or a competitive aspect. So one of the things that we sometimes see is that clubs or gyms or dojos where there is a competition aim for some of the students can also be exclusive or can also exclude people who are not interested in competing. And that's something that we just have to be aware of. And we have to make sure when we're, you know, working, when we're teaching or when we're practicing, that we make sure to promote that atmosphere of, you know, some people are definitely working to compete, and that's great. But they also have to be respectful of the people who are not competing and not exclude those people. So we kind of have to build that atmosphere where there's a kind of an opportunity for both people to participate. And of course, with when we talk about inclusive education, we talk about building a dojo that's inclusive for people with different disabilities or different ages. I think Dr. Honda really nicely touched upon that, where, you know, people, as he mentioned, for Kendo, it's very similar. For Aikido, it's very similar. For Judo, it's very similar. For Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, all of these martial arts, you can start at any age. You know, it's great. There's no barrier to entry into the martial arts, as long as we as coaches and as practitioners learn to respect the way different people's bodies are and what their limitations are. And then think about those limitations and think about how we can adapt. So how can we adapt the techniques for somebody who is sitting in a wheelchair? How can we adapt techniques for somebody who may not have a limb? You know, it's all possible. We just have to be aware of that, and we have to think creatively and plan ahead. You know, think about how is our environment designed? Is our environment where we're teaching, is our dojo, is our gym, is it open? Is it free of obstacles? Can people get in? Can people find their space? Is it quiet enough where people can hear? When we're teaching, so are we teaching silently, or are we explaining things in detail, and are we demonstrating to people who maybe can't see a demonstration? Because that's one other thing that can be exclusive. I've been in dojos where they say like, oh, traditionally we just demonstrate silently. Oof, that's not great when you can't see. In fact, that's the first thing that's going to make me turn around and leave. So we have to just be aware, something that may have been traditional in the sense of, oh, traditionally it was only demonstrated quietly, silently, and then people watch and then try to imitate that. That's not going to be very inclusive for people who have visual impairments, or people who may just not understand. So we want to make sure that, again, we're not using tradition to exclude anyone, that we're taking tradition and we're using it for what's great and how it encourages people to get involved, but we're not using it to exclude anyone. So that's kind of just a little bit of a summary of what we've heard up until this point, but I think this is a great opportunity to kind of have a jumping off and a little bit more discussion before we have to end.
Absolutely. That's brilliant, Nick. You did a great summary there, and you've added to the conversation too. You didn't just summarize, and I'm really inspired by each of you, how you're sharing from your own personal experiences as well. I feel inspired to even get back to my own martial arts roots. I did judo when I was a child, because I'm really feeling your passion and the potential. I'm from the conversation, I'm just really getting this underlying theme of the value, the potential of martial arts, the various, whichever martial art that is, and how they can really contribute to a person's well-being, the society's well-being, just through all of the values that are available. But I'd like to open it up to each of you. Do any of you have any comments or anything you'd like to come in? Or maybe somebody in the panel may even have another question for another panelist. So please join in.
May I jump in with something quickly?
Yes, please, Simon.
I'm going to try and keep it as succinct as possible, because you gave me, everyone said things that have made me write a lot of things down. The first one I wanted to mention is that about the sort of inclusion with the using tradition as a way of inclusion, is that tradition and, should we say, cultural practices that come through, me doing the Japanese martial arts in this case, it was only as a child, I had no idea that most of the things I was taught were essentially either abbreviated, completely incorrect, or just modern inventions. But it doesn't actually matter, because what happened was there was the way I would put it is that the intent for my instructor at the time was very much, if I say, an honorable intention. There were mistakes made. I mean, he clearly watched the Karate Kid film a lot, so it was a case of, you must always look eye when you bow. But it was only years and years later I discovered that was wrong. But it didn't matter, because what happened was, by him trying his best to keep those cultural elements alive, that the tradition became a way of provoking a sense of cultural appreciation, but also a fascination that led me to go and learn further down the line and actually correct my practices 24, 25 years later, and I'm still doing it now. But also, I don't do everything exactly as would probably be done in a Japanese dojo, because I don't actually necessarily need to. I do still use the Japanese terms, as Nick mentioned, because I think it's a great way of just it unifies the people in the group, and it sort of levels a playing field. Anyone coming into it from a Western perspective are typically not going to know much about the cultural aspects at all. So it puts everyone on a slightly level playing field. And because it's a shared experience of learning, I've always worked on the basis of that if someone comes in, they're a white belt, I always tell them the person who's the belt above you is responsible for looking after you. And then the person above them is responsible for looking after the ones below as well. And it's this idea that they're always trying to pass knowledge downwards. And actually, it shouldn't necessarily be me always giving questions or giving answers in any way. And this is where, that may not be a culturally traditional way of doing it, but it's become a tradition within our group, and that's nothing wrong with us inventing those sort of traditions. I'm just going to give a really short example before I stop talking so Lynn can come in. But we have a tradition in our organization about silk black belts, which is that the silk wears off and it comes back to white, and it shows that you never stop learning. Well, there's no basis of to say that that's a long-term cultural practice, but the message is right. So there's no reason to not do that and make that a symbol of something that we're aspiring to. But yeah, I'll stop there, and otherwise I will keep going.
Thank you, Simon. I appreciate that very much. Lynn, you have your hand up there.
Yeah, thanks. I'd like to, again, look at it from the viewpoint of an outsider then. I'm going to forget my martial arts experience and look at it from a coach educator. I have great sympathy for my Japanese colleagues here and other colleagues in Japan who are trying to embed Kendo then within the Japanese education system. And I can hear a lot of great ideas and noble ideas and things that we wish to accomplish. But I think the key issue in martial arts in general is education. If we're looking at this as the point as teachers, educators, we need to consider coach education. I'm thinking about the UK, and what I don't see, if I'm quite honest, it was really nice to hear Simon talking about what he's referring to there is reciprocal coaching, people working together. And I believe he's also hinted towards the Kohai Senpai system, which if used properly is fantastic. But what I often see is a very teacher-centered approach, very egotistical and centered around the person at the front who directs the class to do things, and it's very one way, okay? Dr. Honda mentioned the coaching spectrum there, from open skills to closed skills to open skills, I should say. Great to see that. But what I see often is people practicing closed skills, regardless of rank, whether they're white belts with 3 months experience or black belts with 20 years experience. There is not a differentiation there. And I think the real issue is people just don't know how to teach. And why would they? Because they haven't had coach education. I didn't immediately become a soccer coach when I was born. I didn't learn how to coach soccer, playing soccer. I needed coach education to become a coach educator. I needed to learn about the approaches I need to use to get good feedback, to be able to recreate the practice in the best way. As Nick has alluded to, everyone learns in a different way. And if I have a student who's left-footed, I'm right-footed, I need to adapt. It's my job as the educator. But I do see this very behavioristic approach, where perhaps we could go for a bit more of a constructivist approach, consider the individual at the center of the learning, because everyone's different. And this is what we really need to do. So it's great to have these discussions, but in a practical way, we really need to think about coach education in so many different ways, because at the end of the day, it's not about me. And it's certainly not about the photograph of the guy on the wall who's 100 years old that you've never met. It's about that child in front of me that I'm trying to teach to help to have a better life. So I think there's nothing wrong with tradition. And there's a long history in martial arts of people who allude to tradition, but then they change things to suit their own purposes. Like Jigoro Kano, fantastic example of a great educator. Funakoshi, his karate bears very little resemblance to the karate from Okinawa, and so on. And there's nothing wrong with that. We've always changed things, and we need to realize that and not hide behind tradition in that way. But the key point is always for me, don't teach the art, teach the student. That's just my viewpoint in terms of inclusivity, because that's really what it's about. I really don't care about someone from 200 years ago, if I'm honest. I care about the 8-year-old child in front of me. That's just my viewpoint. Okay, that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. I love what you shared with my inclusive hat on, you know, that athlete-centered approach really is key, you know, or the needs of the group, the needs of the participants, and making sure they're being addressed, you know, so thank you for that. Would anybody else like to come in? Maybe some of our Japanese colleagues, even Dr. Jennings, maybe at some point. Feel free, just unmute.
Okay.
Please, Mr. Honda, Dr. Honda.
Thank you very much, Nick and Lynn, for sharing. I very much agree with what you said. The reason I wrote this book is circumstances of Kendo in Japan and the UK, where I was studying, are different. For example, the average age of starting Kendo in the UK is 29 years old when I was there. But I started Kendo when I was 6, with about 100 friends. same age. So, but when I was doing British national team coach, I visited lots of dojos and practice there in many dojos. Same way, same method, and try to introduce Keiko method, practice method, as Japanese people do in Japan. So I try to introduce new ideas. I did a couple of coaching course, but the tradition sometimes prevents teachers from accepting new ideas. And I had to work a lot. I had to do hard work to change their mind. What you are aiming is not keeping the same thing. What you're achieving, think about what you're trying to achieve. Let me share my another slide. Can you see?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, sorry, not this one. Sorry. Let me try again.
And whilst it's downloading, I'll quickly chip in if you like. This one theoretical point I think it's great what we're all saying, and we've talked about cultivation of character, and often that's associated with self-cultivation. And in my research, I came up with the term of shared cultivation, which is drawn upon the data of my participants, because really they're trying to get to the same aim. They're trying to share the journey of martial arts throughout their lives. A lot of them took it up as adults, but they have an idea they're not going to stop, they're not going to retire, they're going to do it till the day they die, in inverted commas, but that there is longevity, and they're trying to develop and perfect themselves, even though they never get to that perfection. So I think Chinese martial arts, Japanese martial arts are the same in that regard. So yeah, that's just my little comments whilst you get the download. Cheers.
Lovely contribution. Thank you, Dr. Jennings. I appreciate it.
In Kendo, if you get fully equipped, you have to tie 9 times. 9 times. And sometimes people who believe in tradition ask beginners to do the same. It takes more than 20 minutes for kids to do this. Sometimes in physical education, PE teachers ask students to do the same, like I do. And here, tying himo for head mask, this takes longest time. It's difficult to tie. So in my class, I use fastener tape. It's easy, only 10 seconds to put this mask on. But sometimes people strongly disagree with this idea because they say it's not tradition. But what I want to teach is, well, I want them to enjoy practicing Kendo. I want them to learn traditional idea of Kendo. I'd like to my students show their respect to other students with understanding of traditional ideas. But sometimes, or often, this kind of tradition stops. Sorry, that's all.
Thank you, Dr. Honda.
Sorry, the shortly, as I have presented it ISF with George, I have also tried to cooperate with Japanese, the Kendo, the teacher, and they introduced some idea of TGFU into the Kendo teaching, yeah, modify the game, and try to ask a student to find the tactical tasks in the game. They find the solution. They discuss in each other team how to get the point and so on. Yeah, it makes the student motivated. Of course, teacher have to show some idea, or some way or some effective way to improve the skills and so on. But the student can find out the tactical tasks by themselves if we can give them the more the appropriate modified games and so on. And that is maybe the one of the another way, no? To make the PE lesson or the Kendo lesson, the Budo lesson more student-centered and so on. Maybe students can find out the meaning of learning the Budo by themselves. Maybe this is also another the chances in school physical education. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Okade. Simon, I see you have your hand up there. However, I'm very mindful of the time. We're coming close to an hour and a half. I feel like we could have stayed here for another hour discussing and conversing and learning from each other. And so to wrap up the session, I'll go around to each of our panelists and give you a moment if there's anything else you'd like to say, maybe one brief sentence or two, maybe it's something specific, some specific advice on how martial arts instructors can best honor the traditions of their art while also facilitating inclusion, or maybe it's just something like maybe you, Simon, there was something you still wanted to say and that now is your opportunity to leave our attendees with something. So I'll go around in order of how you're showing up on my screen. So Simon, please go ahead.
I won't say the things I intended because it will take us probably another hour. But I think I'm going to leave something really simple, which is for anyone watching this later down the line, is a little question for them to ask themselves, which is if they want to use or do already use the label tradition in their practices, make sure you ask yourself what is the motive behind using it before doing it.
Lovely. Thank you, Simon. And Nick?
Sure. You know, the great thing about some of the traditional practices, as we call them, or some of the typical cultural aspects of the martial arts, is that the benefit is I, a person born in the United States, can walk into a gym or a dojo in Chile and immediately know how to be a part of that, because that's one of the great things about the martial arts and some of their universal, some of the traditions that we've kind of developed. But again, just as an example, in my home dojo here in the United States, rather than only count each ni san shi in Japanese for counting, we also ask the students to each count in their home tongue, because we have a multicultural club. So again, we can look at traditions. Great, it can be an aspect for really promoting inclusion, and that's what we have to focus on.
Thank you, Nick. Dr. Okade?
Thank you very much for the interesting discussion with you all. It is also for me the good opportunity to reconsider what I can do for developing the curriculum in physical education and also the PA teacher education program in different countries and so on. I say thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And I do highly recommend you connect with Nick as well after, given that that's his whole domain, special education. Thank you very much. Dr. Honda?
Yes, thank you very much. This webinar gave me a great opportunity to think and rethink about tradition and inclusion. So I'm very motivated to publish my second book now. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I will ask you for, the name of your book, and I will link that into wherever anybody's watching, whether this is on YouTube, I'll put it in the description as well. Thank you very much. And Lynn, you're next.
I'll keep it short and simple. Keiko, keiko, keiko. This is the advice that one of my teachers, arigato gozaimasu, gave to me. And basically it means keep practicing. If you want to get good at something, don't pontificate, do it. That's the only way you will improve as a coach, a teacher, and a karateka, kendoka, judoka. But keiko is a special word for us, because keiko means to look back at the past and learn from the past, not just practice. So please do that. If you want to honor the past, do what I'm going to do in 20 minutes time. Go in the garden and practice, okay? Get sweaty. This is what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dr. Jennings?
Well, thanks. Great stuff, everybody. Really enjoyed working with you. So basically my sum up would be that martial arts, we talked about language before. In many ways, movement can be a language. So often in Wing Chun, for example, we talk about you can speak the language of sticking hands. So when we join hands together, we can roll. And obviously people with, say, visual impairments can do this as well. You can, if you don't speak Cantonese or you don't speak English or whatever language it is, it's a nice medium. So I think that's what Nick was also getting to, that you can go to another country, you know how to fit in. And I think that's what's sort of wonderful about martial arts, really, is one of those. And it's really close contact kind of interaction. And it's prolonged as well, because we are having a long conversation with someone sustained, quite different to what Simon talked about. The team sports are great, but I appreciate football and things, but you have very little time on the ball, whereas martial arts, you are sustained, immersed inside that interaction. So that's something that's very interesting about them, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jennings. And well, we've come to the end of our session, and I really want to thank each of our panelists from the bottom of my heart. And this has been such an enjoyable conversation, and I hope you all have enjoyed it as much as I have, and as much as I hope our attendees, anybody watching this, whether you're with us here live or watching the recording, as I said, and I hope you've learned plenty. I've learned so much myself. And so this is, as I said, this is the third webinar in a larger series. The next session we have is a question and answer session where attendees get to ask questions. You can submit questions in advance if you won't be able to attend live. That will be next Tuesday, July 27th from 2 to 3 p.m. Universal Time, coordinated time. And so just to say one more time, thank you all to each of you. I know our panelists, especially in particular, our Japanese panelists, is very late for you now. And we wish you a lovely night of rest. And as we all bask in all of the energy and the knowledge that we've learned here and the conversation that we've had. As I said, if wherever you're watching this, if you're watching it on UNESCO ICM's platform, you'll have access to the PowerPoint slides that were shared. We'll also provide the link to Dr. Honda's book. If you're watching on YouTube, we'll have these linked in the description. So thank you all, everybody. I wish you such a wonderful day, evening, night, wherever you are. Sincere gratitude. And I see we have some thanks coming in from our attendees as well. Thank you all, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching as well. Cheers.
And well done for a great webinar, everybody, our panelists. Thank you.
Well done, guys.
I'll be in touch.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Ashley. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.